All right, good evening, and welcome to Phi Sigma Pi's roundtable discussion on chapter morale. I am the Vice President of Chapter Development, Brian Button, and I'm coming to you live from my house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I am pleased to introduce the guests we have for today's discussion. They're both alumni of Phi Sigma Pi and chapter consultants. The first is Robbie Gusella. Hello, Robbie. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I am really looking forward to this conversation on chapter morale.
It's great to have you. And we also have Casey Gans. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Brian. I'm also very excited to participate.
Awesome. No problems with morale here. So we're going to be taking questions from the live audience. So if you're watching this live, please log into Twitter and ask your question using the hashtag PSP Roundtable, or I think there's a way to use the Hangouts app to ask questions inside the Hangout, and we'll get to those questions during our discussion. So first, we'll go with my first question for you guys is, how do you recognize low morale in chapters? Casey?
I can take this one. So there are a couple red flags that people notice, I think, when there is low morale present in a chapter. Some of them are low event attendance. Chapter meetings are either silent or there's a lot of bickering over issues that normally may not cause as much bickering. Something that I've noticed as well too is, especially in chapters that use a lot of email contact or group me or Facebook groups like that, is that people just don't get responses, emails don't get read, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to agree with Casey. I think those are all some pretty big kind of signs that maybe something's a little off. I think another big point is kind of always going with your gut as well too. I think one of the big questions with morale is like, are you enjoying your experience, right? Do you enjoy going to a chapter meeting or going to, a fellowship event or a scholarship event or any of your induction ceremonies with, the end of the semester coming up? We're going to be welcoming a lot of new initiates. Are you looking forward to those events, right? And I think a lot of times if you're not enjoying, well, that might be one of the signs that, maybe something off. It might be a personal thing, it might be a chapter thing, but I think definitely kind of just going with your gut on how you feel the semester or the quarter is going for your chapter is another kind of big sign as to how you think the rest of your chapter might be performing.
Right, and this is an organization where you're supposed to enjoy being in the organization, so if that's not happening, then there's something that needs to be addressed. So I guess, Robbie, a question I have is, if you identify your chapter as having low morale, what can you do?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is you need to address it in some way, whether that is, internally saying, what, we need to address something, whether that's going to the president, the brother at large, anybody else on e-board, maybe discussing with other members of your chapter who maybe have similar sentiments and saying, how do you feel like this semester is going? What do you feel like has kind of been off? And I think that's where it really starts, is having that conversation and seeing what kind of feedback goes, kind of proceeds from, those questions that you might have, and kind of seeing, like, do we feel like that, yeah, a good portion of the chapter does think that maybe, morale can be worked on, or maybe it's kind of something where we're not noticing morale is an issue for some other brothers in the chapter who may be overtly involved or, kind of may not have a solid grasp of every kind of feeling brothers might have in the chapter. So I really think it just starts with some honesty in just acknowledging that, what, this is something that we need to address.
Absolutely. And that's so important, is finding where you are in the chapter. Casey, what if you're in a chapter and you look around and you see some of your fellow members not being involved as much? How do you get them more involved?
Well, I think it's important for members to remember that even if you're not holding a leadership position, if you don't hold the title of president or brother at large or fellowship chair, it varies chapter to chapter, that every member is a vital part of this organization and a vital part of their chapter. Ultimately, Phi Sigma Pi would be nothing without its members. So I think it's important for members to keep in mind that even if they don't have that title, that their opinions and their feelings matter, and if they feel like that they're noticing other members who may not be as involved, like I said, even if you're not holding that position, it's always important to reach out to people that you have been noticing that may not be attending events or may be kind of like lacking in the communication department. It all starts with a conversation, and I think reaching out to those people is really the first step.
Absolutely, and that's very important to remember, that not all leadership is organizational leadership. Like you said, you do not have to hold a position in the chapter to exercise leadership in a meaningful way. So, is there someone that should be responsible in a chapter for increasing morale, or is that someone's specific job title in a chapter?
I can take this one. Like I mentioned, and like Robbie mentioned earlier, the conversation may begin with the president or the brother at large chair, etc. But every member is a vital member of Phi Sigma Pi, and really it comes down to morale being a chapter-wide concern and a chapter-wide effort. It's going to take the entire chapter to get involved to boost that low morale, instead of it just being, or falling on the shoulders of the president or the executive board or the leadership, really.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, Casey, I think one thing that can be helpful to always keep in mind, and kind of echoing back to the previous question, is that, even if you're not in a position, that doesn't mean you don't have any power to kind of voice your opinion, voice your feelings, because at the end of the day, this is your undergrad experience. Like, this is, your 4 years, your 3 years, however long you're going to be in Phi Sigma Pi, and you want to make sure that experience is positive and meaningful and worthwhile. And I think when we're looking at, who is responsible for chapter morale, and ensuring that morale is always staying high, well, we want to make sure that the chapter accurately understands where morale is. And I think a lot of times brothers, especially if they're not in leadership positions or if they're newer to the chapter, kind of get a sense of like, well, I don't have a position, I don't have a title, so I'm just going to take a back seat and just hope that somebody else will recognize something. And I think that's one of the saddest things that we can do as a chapter, is kind of just waiting for somebody else to say something or acknowledge something that might be going on. I think the sooner you speak up, I think the sooner that we kind of bring those questions to the chapter as a whole, the sooner we're going to have the opportunity to say, you know what, you're totally right. Like, yeah, like we definitely need to be working on some of those things. And I think at that point, then, we find a way to get brothers a little bit more involved. Like, there are some brothers in your chapter who are the super extroverted, like they, love Phi Sigma Pi. They want to, go out and see, and just make sure that Phi Sigma Pi is the best thing ever, and they don't have a problem with, being loud and obnoxious about it sometimes. And I also think there's those members who are a little bit quieter or more introverted, who can still have that same passion, who can still have high morale, but feel a little bit more comfortable, expressing that in kind of, more intimate, smaller gatherings or relationships, and, speaking to somebody else on a more personal level. So I think it's up to the chapter at that point to identify, like, how can we kind of make sure that we're, attacking morale from the point of like, let's find what our brothers are good at, let's put them in those opportunities and see what comes from that. So I think a lot of times we think of morale as like, the loud, PSP spirit or chants or, everything like that. And I think sometimes we have too broad or too, not broad, but too small of an idea of what that morale can entail and who can be helpful. So I think making sure that we're not kind of only looking at the, the excited brothers or the brothers who always have something to say, but find a way for brothers who maybe don't have as loud of a voice to also feel a part of that process and feel engaged somehow.
Awesome. So let's talk resources. Obviously, you guys, the chapter consultants, are a great resource, not just for chapter morale, but for everything. Whenever I get questions about, my chapter's doing this, I always say, go to your chapter consultant. What else do we have that's available for chapters if they need help with increasing their morale?
So thank you for the recognition, Brian. As your chapter consultant, we are here as a resource for the chapters, and like I said, that's what we're here for. You can also, there's a few other resources I think that chapters can utilize that may not be as apparent, I guess. The university or the college may have resources for the chapter to utilize, whether it's the Office of Student Activities, the Office of Greek Life. It's different from university to university, but they may have some great workshops, programs, presentations, or even ideas really on how to combat low morale. And I think that the chapter itself is a great resource in combating that morale. If you just open up the discussion during a chapter meeting and provide that space and that time for brothers to speak up and discuss how they're feeling about the level of morale in the chapter and ideas they may have to combat it, you may be surprised what you get back out of it. And there are also a number of leadership and action modules that chapters can utilize by requesting them at phisigmapi.org/request-a-module. A couple of the ones that may be helpful are in conflict management. They are diffusing explosive situations, say what, talk it out, and that's not the issue. There's also a couple team building modules that might be helpful. The first one is the Team Foundation. There is no I in team. And the second one is the Team Foundation Winning Combination. There's also a brand new module called Building Trust, the Seeds of Success. And yeah.
Yeah, get those leadership and action modules in there. That's a great resource, and I hope our chapters are taking advantage of them. All right.
Yeah, action is a fantastic opportunity, so I highly suggest and encourage chapters to kind of see like what is available. Even if you're not feeling that morale is a problem right now, there are a ton of modules that are going to hit something that you feel like the chapter can improve in. So I definitely encourage you guys to check it out.
Awesome. Now we'll go to the questions that have been coming in from the audience. Robbie, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, so we have a question addressing kind of senioritis. So the question is, we've had problems with members checking out during their senior year. How do we keep seniors present and excited? So Casey, do you have any comments on that?
I do. This is something that I see in a couple of my chapters. A couple of my chapters come to me with concerns on seniors sort of checking out or not being as involved during their senior year, which is, I think, understandable. Senior year tends to get a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're looking into job interviews or, kind of where you're going after graduation, making plans to apply to grad school, things like that. Seniors tend to have a lot on their plate, but at the same time, ultimately, Phi Sigma Pi it can be a support system for those seniors, but I think it's also important to communicate with those seniors that they are still a valuable member of the chapter, and that I think some of the ways to keep them as involved as possible during their senior year are to, first of all, make sure that they know that they're still a valuable member of the chapter and that their feedback is important. Chances are they've been in the chapter for a good amount of time, and they probably have a lot of advice for new members, or even just like sharing experiences that they've had in the chapter can be a good resource for younger members too. Another way to keep seniors involved, I think, is to foster a good transition program for officers. This will give those seniors an opportunity to get involved and share with new leaders, newly elected leaders rather, things that they've seen that worked, things that haven't worked potentially. So that's a good way to keep them involved too. Another way is to ensure that your chapter has a strong alumni program. That way these seniors won't feel like like their graduation is sort of the end of their Phi Sigma Pi experience, that they will still have an opportunity to be involved with the chapter after they graduate, if they so wish.
Absolutely. The alumni piece is really important because we do say brotherhood is for life. I graduated 15 years ago, and I'm still active and involved. There are ways to be involved, not just with your chapter, but with the national organization. We have active and involved alumni who've been around for much longer than 15 years like me. So just getting them encouraged to really see this as not the end, but the beginning of a next part, I think is really key. So thank you for that. All right. Well, that'll just about do it for tonight. Thank you, guys.
We actually have another question.
Oh, go ahead.
That just came in here. So it is, how can you keep up morale when your chapter is steadily declining in membership? And this is from Tyler. So I think, it's definitely difficult. I think when you see your, chapter size kind of dwindling, I think one of the big things is to, always focus on the positive, right? Like what good will come from having, a smaller chapter. And I think one thing that keep in mind is that, it's probably going to be a little bit easier, hopefully, to communicate. And communication is always important, especially when you have a smaller group. And I think, when we can open that communication up and we can, be honest and say, yeah, like our size is going down a little bit, what can we do to kind of get it back up? I think making sure that we're engaging all our brothers, who are still part of that chapter, finding something that is in their interest, something they're passionate about, something that speaks to their strengths, whether that's something with their personality or their interests or their academics, whatever it might be, to find a way to make that work for the chapter, especially if you have brothers who might be involved as like an orientation leader or a tour guide or a student ambassador. They can be a really helpful resource in just reaching out to freshmen or new students. I think anybody involved in service on campus, maybe that's an outside organization, maybe that is another honor society that has more of a service aspect, finding ways to kind of bring in their experience and bring in their expertise to make that to give them something to feel a part of, right? I think the big thing with morale is there something here for me, right? Is there something that I'm getting out of this experience? And the more that we can put brothers in those positions where they do feel engaged, they feel like they're getting something meaningful out of this experience, the more they're going to want to give back to the chapter and be helpful. So I think, yeah, it is tough at times. I think you kind of just got to rally the troops. You got to regroup and say, all right, this is who we have right now. And let's see where we go from there, right? Let's make a game plan. Like, who's in this with us? Who, really wants to be on the front lines? Where are our extroverts to kind of go out there and meet new people? Where are those brothers that maybe are a little bit more strategic, really good at planning to kind of help with recruitment? And are we doing our best to kind of, point out to prospective new members, what opportunities do come from being a part of Phi Sigma Pi? Or are we kind of just like, well, you know what, we're kind of small right now, we would love for you to join us, but you don't have to, right? So I think we definitely want to, always check our attitude and make sure that we're always coming at it from that kind of positive standpoint that, we can do this.
Absolutely, and it's so important. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is to realize that, if your chapter is going through a period of low morale, that your chapter's not alone. Lots of chapters deal with this issue. When I was an undergrad in the late 90s, our chapter had morale issues from time to time. So it's really something that a lot of organizations go through, not just Phi Sigma Pi, but lots of organizations have morale issues. So don't feel like you're alone. Take advantage of your resources and just try to figure out what you can do to best utilize your membership, because that's really the key to a lot of these things. So if you enjoyed this hangout, get ready, because we're going to have a lot more hangouts coming to you in the spring. So keep your ear to the ground for that. If you're watching this live, we just announced that we hit 99,000 in our Hours of Hope campaign. So good job, everyone, and we're going for that last 1,000. So get those Hours of Hope reported in. Reminder that, of course, our centennial is coming up. February 14th is going to be our 100th birthday. So make sure you celebrate that in some way. Our alumni convention has just been announced for the first weekend in June. It's in Seattle, Washington. I'm very excited. I can't wait to go. I will definitely be there. And then, of course, our national convention in July in Kansas City. So we're very excited about all of those exciting opportunities coming up. I want to thank you guys for joining us tonight, and I'd like to especially thank my guests, Robbie and Casey. Thanks for joining me tonight, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Good night, everyone.